There is a phrase in Veth medical doctrine that translates, roughly, to the kindness of release. It means, when something is beyond saving, you stop spending resources on it. You log the failure, you update the records, and you move on. No ceremony. No grief. The universe does not pause for the ones who don't make it, and neither do we. I have recited that doctrine 312 times in my career as a field logistics officer. I have signed the release forms. I have updated the records. I have moved on. I had never, until the night the human doctors walked out of that tent and left her with me, understood that some species treat giving up as the opening move in a negotiation. They gave her 32 days. I watched. I logged. I drank terrible recycled water that the commissary insisted on calling coffee because some human quartermaster had mislabeled the entire shipment 6 months ago, and now we were all committed to the lie. 32 days. She had other plans. This is my log. I am filing it under anomalous outcomes because there is no category in the Veth Coalition database for what I witnessed, and I have checked twice, and the closest match the system returns is equipment malfunction, which is almost funny enough to make me choke on my not coffee. Almost. I'll start at the beginning. Or rather, I'll start the way she would in the middle, where it already hurts, and let the context catch up on its own. The human doctors left at 0340. I know the exact time because I was logging supply manifests in the adjacent tent and I heard the specific sound of someone refusing to look back, that particular silence that follows a group of people who have collectively decided that what they are leaving behind is no longer their problem. Boots on gravel. Low murmurs. The zip of a thermal bag closing. Then, nothing. I waited 40 seconds before I went in. I am not sure what I expected. I think I expected her to already be gone. She was not gone. She was lying in the diagnostic cradle with approximately 14 different monitoring leads taped to what remained of her functional skin, and she was staring at the ceiling of the medical tent with the flat, deliberate attention of someone reading an important document. There was no document. It was canvas. She was staring at canvas. They leave, she said. Her voice was wrong. Not distressed, just wrong the way a machine sounds when it is running on partial power. Something important was absent from it. I did not know what. Yes, I said. That was all. She went back to reading the ceiling. I stood there for longer than I should have. I am a field logistics officer for the 3rd Veth Coalition Auxiliary, which means my functional responsibilities include supply chain management, equipment allocation, and the documentation of material losses. Human Sergeant Reyes, Daniela A. The serial number redacted per her own request at intake, was not material. She was not my responsibility. She was not even my species. I went back to my manifests. I came back 11 minutes later with a nutrient pack and a cup of the not coffee, because I had 2 of each and the math of having more than I needed while something adjacent to me was running on partial power bothered me in a way I could not log or categorize. She looked at the not coffee for a long moment. That smells like a tire fire, she said. The commissary, I know about the commissary. She took it anyway. Drank half in one pull. Made a face like I had handed her something synthesized from regret. Drank the rest. Thank you. I sat down on the supply crate nearest the door because I did not intend to stay. I was going to ask the standard questions: is there anyone to notify, are there directives I should log, and then return to the manifests. What did they tell you? She asked. The doctors. Yes. They filed a terminal assessment. 32 days, provisional. They cited, I stopped. The clinical language felt wrong in the low light of the tent. Systemic damage from the Corridor 7 exposure. Radiation compound. Neurological cascade involvement. They said the progression is, yeah. She set the empty cup on the cradle rail with the practiced precision of someone who has spent years not spilling things in unstable conditions. I know what I've got. I did not say anything. Sit down properly, she said. You look like you're about to run. I was. I sat properly. Her name had come to me in a routing document 6 weeks before the incident at Corridor 7. I had processed her unit's equipment requisitions. They had wanted thermal sealant, 3 grades of field adhesive, and an entirely unreasonable quantity of something called duct tape, which our cataloging system had initially flagged as a structural material and, then, reclassified 4 times before giving up and labeling it miscellaneous fastening compound, human origin. I had approved the request because I had learned, in the 18 months of joint operations between the Veth Coalition and the Earth Compact, that when human units requisition things the system didn't understand, you approved the request and waited to be surprised. I had not expected to meet her attached to 14 monitoring leads. I need to ask about directives, I said. Notification? Yes. No family. Not anymore. No weight on it. Just information, delivered clean. Log it as a log it, however, you need to. I don't care about the form. I noted it. I noted it twice because the first time my stylus skipped. What's your name? She asked. Logistics Officer Senthaver. Designation, your name. I paused. The distinction she was drawing between designation and name was not one I had thought about recently. The VAR, I said. Most of my unit uses the VAR. The VAR. She tested it. Nodded once, the way humans do when they've filed something. How long are you stationed here? The rotation ends in 19 days. Then, reassignment. To where? That depends on the supply chain assessments I complete here. She almost smiled. Not quite. The muscles moved and then stopped, like a signal that got interrupted. So you're stuck here. I have work. Right. She looked at the ceiling again. I noticed she had a habit of doing this, using the canvas like a flat surface to rest her thoughts on. As though the ceiling were a desk. The VAR. I need something from you. I'm not a medical officer. I know what you are. Her voice had changed. Not harder, denser. Like the same weight redistributed into less space. I need you to keep logging. Whatever happens in this tent. Whatever I do. Whatever I say. I need it in the record. I looked at her. I know how this reads, she said. It reads like a person who wants a witness. The almost smile came back. This time it completed. It was a strange thing, that smile, not happy, but not performed either. Something real that had gone slightly wrong in transit, like a message that arrives with the encoding shifted just enough to make you work for the meaning. Smart, she said. You're going to be useful, the VAR. I went back to my manifests. I came back at 0600 with another nutrient pack and more not coffee because I had them and because I put something in my log about the supply inventories that was technically accurate but not entirely the complete picture of why I was returning. She was doing push-ups. Not well. This requires context. She had a fractured left radius and a splint, 14 monitoring leads, and what the doctor's final assessment had described as compromised respiratory efficiency at approximately 62% of baseline. She was doing push-ups on her knuckles, the fractured arm trembling with each rep, and she was counting under her breath in a language I did not recognize, not standard, not her first language either, something older, something that sounded like it had been passed down through people who needed numbers when everything was going wrong. She got to 31 before she noticed me. Don't, she said. I wasn't going to. You had a whole sentence. I put the nutrient pack down. I did not say the sentence. I had been going to say something about rest. About the terminal assessment. About 62% respiratory efficiency and fractured radii and 32 provisional days. I had been going to say all of it in the gentle, clinical language that the Veth Coalition trained its logistics officers to use when interfacing with beings experiencing end-of-life status, which was the kind of language that meant well and felt, in the moment of actual use, like being wrapped in bureaucratic foam while someone read you your own file. She already knew her file. She finished the set. 38. Put her arms down. Breathed in a way that sounded like work. turned over and lay flat for exactly 90 seconds, staring at her canvas desk, then sat up. "There's a treatment," she said. The doctors filed their assessment based on what's available on this station." She reached under the cradle and pulled out a tablet she absolutely should not have had the energy to obtain, and yet. "There's a facility. 6 days out. Runs experimental protocols, they've had outcomes with radiation cascade. Not great outcomes. But, outcomes." I looked at the tablet. The facility was real. I recognized the coordinates from an auxiliary logistics hub I had briefly been considered for before this rotation. The program she was referencing was real. I had seen it in the medical literature that coalition officers were required to skim and not required to understand. "The doctors reviewed this option," I said. "The doctors reviewed it and decided the transit would kill me before the treatment could. That assessment is probably right." Flat. Not angry. Not resigned. Something else. Something I did not have the Veth vocabulary for, that I was starting to suspect the Veth vocabulary had never needed. But probably is not the same thing as definitely, and I have personally survived a number of things that were probably going to kill me, so. I sat down on the supply crate. "You need a transport authorization," I said. "I know what I need. The duty officer won't file it without a medical clearance." "I know. The medical officers on this station just filed a terminal assessment and left." "I know, the VAR." We sat with that for a moment. Outside, the station was beginning its early rotation, sounds systems cycling up, boots on grating, someone 3/10 over arguing about a calibration error with the energy of a person who had been arguing about it for several days and had developed opinions. "You're a logistics officer," she said. "Yes. Logistics officers file equipment transfers." I looked at her. "I am not equipment." "No." That almost smile again. "But, the medical cradle is. The monitoring leads are. The portable respiratory unit that I'm going to need for transit is." She tilted her head. "What's the process for transferring medical equipment between stations?" I was quiet for longer than I should have been. "The VAR. The process," I said slowly, "involves a destination facility, a receiving logistics officer, a transit authorization, and an equipment manifest that accounts for all associated items." "And if there's a patient attached to the equipment?" "Then, the patient would be logged as." I stopped. She waited. "Associated material," I said. The smile completed again. Fully this time. All the way. And it was not comfortable to look at. Not because it was wrong. Because it was absolutely right, and it was attached to a person with 62% respiratory function and 32 provisional days, and it contained something I recognized from 18 months of joint operations, something I had seen in requisition requests for structural materials with names the catalog couldn't process, the certainty that this was going to work, even before it had started. Even before anyone had agreed to help. I opened a new log entry. I labeled it Equipment Transfer, Provisional Medical. "You're going to need to hold still," I said, "while I document the serial numbers on everything you're currently attached to." She lay back on the cradle. Folded her hands. Stared at her canvas desk. "Take your time," she said. I did not take my time. I documented every lead, every monitor, every unit, the cradle itself, the portable respiratory unit I had not yet obtained but was already mentally rerouting through the supply chain, and I filed the preliminary transfer request at 0623 station time, 6 hours and 43 minutes after the doctors had zipped their thermal bag and walked out into the dark. I went back to my manifests. I came back at 0900 with not coffee. She was doing sit-ups. I sat down and drank mine and did not say anything, and outside, the calibration argument had apparently been resolved or possibly abandoned, and somewhere on the other side of the station a transport was cycling its engines for the morning routing, and I wrote in my personal log, not the official one, the one I keep in the small notation file I have carried since my first rotation, I wrote, "She knows something about time that I don't." I didn't know yet what I meant by it. I would. The receiving logistics officer at Palace Station was named Coordinator Vethorin, and she called me at 11:40 to inform me that my transfer request contained what she described as a classification irregularity that borders on creative fiction. I told her I was not sure what she meant. She told me she was looking at a manifest for medical equipment that included, as item 47 on the associated material list, one human compact soldier, ambulatory, non-terminal status pending review, with a condition rating I had entered as functional within documented parameters, which was technically accurate in the same way that describing a compromised airlock is non-optimal but operational is technically accurate. Non-terminal, she said. The terminal assessment was provisional, I said. The assessment was signed by 2 doctors. The doctors laughed. Silence. The VAR, she said. Are you trying to transport a dying soldier by listing her as medical equipment? I'm trying to transfer medical equipment that has an associated patient. The patient is incidentally also the soldier. The equipment requires a receiving facility with medical infrastructure, which Palace has, and the patient requires access to the experimental cascade treatment program, which Palace also has. More silence. Longer. The VAR. Her voice had gone flat in a way that I recognized. It was the voice of someone who could see exactly what I was doing and was deciding whether to be a problem about it. The equipment is real, I said. The transfer is procedurally sound. The destination is authorized. The only thing unusual about this request is that the associated material breathes and does push-ups, she said. I had included the morning activity log in the documentation. This had been, I was now reconsidering, either very thorough or very stupid. It demonstrates functionality within documented parameters, I said. She hung up. She called back 4 minutes later and told me the receiving dock at Palace would be cleared for a medical equipment transfer at 1800 and that she was logging her approval under anomalous but procedurally valid and that if this ever came back to her she was going to tell everyone I had forged her authorization code. You have my gratitude, I said. I have your career in my hands if this goes wrong, she said. Get her there. I went back to the tent at 1200 with the transport confirmation and the nutrient pack and the not coffee and the portable respiratory unit I had sourced from the secondary medical supply cache by logging it as a temporary equipment relocation pending inspection, which was I was beginning to understand something about how Sergeant Reyes thought, because that classification had come to me automatically, without effort, and I was not sure that was entirely me. She was sitting up when I came in. Not doing anything, just sitting, with her feet on the floor and her hands on her knees and her eyes open, doing the particular kind of nothing that looks like a person gathering everything they have into one place before they need it. I put the not coffee on the cradle rail. She looked at the transport confirmation. She looked at it for a long time. I am not sure what I had expected. Relief, maybe. Humans did relief in large ways, I had learned. They exhaled loudly. They touched their faces. They said things like, "Oh, thank God," with the fervor of actual theology. She said, "What time do we leave?" 1600. Transit is 6 hours and 4 minutes. What's the weather window? Clear. No corridor interference. She nodded. Filed it. Reached for the not coffee. You're coming. It was not a question. The equipment requires a supervising logistics officer for the duration of transfer, I said. Right. She drank. Made the face. Kept drinking. Does the equipment need anything before we go? I need to finalize the manifest. Then, finalize it. She handed me back the empty cup. And, the VAR, thank you. I went back to the manifests. My stylus did not skip this time. I do not know why I note that. It seems relevant. The transport was a Veth Coalition short-range cargo shuttle, designation 7 Oral, which had previously been used to move calibration equipment and, on one notable occasion, a consignment of human food items that had been improperly manifested and had subsequently raised questions I was not authorized to answer about the smell. It smelled fine now. Sergeant Reyes walked onto it under her own power, which was not something I had been certain was going to happen. She had the portable respiratory unit clipped to her left side, the monitoring leads repositioned for transit, the splinted arm braced, and she walked the way I was beginning to recognize as her specific walk, slightly too deliberate, the kind of deliberate that means the body is doing more negotiation than it is letting on, but the legs moving anyway, one after the other, like they had not received the memo about the 62%. The pilot, a young Veth auxiliary named Koro who had the nervous energy of someone recently assigned their first solo routing, looked at her with undisguised alarm. "She's associated material," I told him. He did not look reassured. "She's also conscious," she said. "Hi." "Hi," he said. The alarm did not decrease. "I'll try not to die on your shuttle." "I thank you," he said. "I appreciate that." She found the cargo bench behind the cockpit partition, sat down, strapped in with the economy of movement of someone who had strapped into 1,000 things in 1,000 worse conditions, and said, "How long until we're clear of station traffic?" 20 minutes, Koro said. "Wake me in 18. She closed her eyes. He looked at me. I sat down across from her with my log and my notation file and the last of the not coffee I had brought in a sealed container because I had 3 hours of manifest amendments to complete and I was not going to do them on insufficient not coffee. "She does that," he said quietly. "Does what?" "Just sleep. On command." I looked at her. She looked asleep. Completely. The monitoring leads were registering steadily. The respiratory unit was cycling with a soft, periodic sound like a very small tide. "She seems to do most things on command," I said. "Including not dying, currently." He thought about that. "Should I be worried?" "About which part?" He thought about it more. Then, he turned back to the controls, because that was a question with too many possible answers and we had a routing window to hit. We were 40 minutes out when she started talking. I was on my third amendment and had just found an error in the thermal unit serial number that was going to require a full renotation, and I was staring at the discrepancy with the specific despair of someone who can see exactly how much work they have just created for themselves, when she said, "Tell me about the treatment." "You've read the literature," I said. "I've read the summary." "Tell me about it." I pulled up the full file. "Read the relevant sections." The treatment was a 3-phase cascade interruption protocol, the first phase aggressive, the second phase reconstruction-oriented, the third phase something the researchers described as consolidation and, which the footnotes clarified was not well understood but, appeared to involve the body doing something unexpected that the protocol seemed to facilitate rather than direct. The success rate for full cascade interrupt was 19%. Partial interrupt, resulting in significantly extended function, was 31%. The remaining outcomes were logged as unsuccessful, which was a medical document's way of saying and then, they died without having to say it. I told her all of this. She listened. Did not interrupt. When I finished she said, 19%. Yes. What's partial? Extended function. Months to years, depending on the patient. Quality variable. She was quiet for a moment. The respiratory unit cycled. "When I was 16, she said, I told my mother I was going to pass my military entrance exam on the first try. She paused. I failed it. I waited. Took it 4 more times over 2 years before I passed. And every time I failed she'd say the same thing, she'd say, Danny, the door isn't locked. It's just heavy." She stopped. The sentence sat in the cargo hold, and she did not explain it, and I did not ask her to. "What happened to your mother?" I said, and then immediately regretted it, because I was a logistics officer and not a counselor and because she had told me on the first night that there was no family and delivered it clean, like information, and I had just pried at a wound I had been given no invitation near. "Corridor 18, she said. 3 years ago. Same delivery. Clean. Just information." "I'm sorry," I said. "Yeah." She looked at the wall of the cargo hold, which was doing the job the tent ceiling had been doing, flat surface, resting place for thoughts. "I've been through her door," she said. Twice now. Both times I thought it was locked. Both times it wasn't. She closed her eyes. Wake me 20 minutes before we dock, she said. I woke her 19 minutes before we docked because I had run the numbers and the pre-dock procedures required at least 19, and I was a logistics officer, and precision was the thing I had instead of certainty. She came awake the way I had begun to expect, all at once, completely, no drowsy in between, like a system that doesn't have a startup sequence because it has always been running. She looked at me. 19, I said. You said 20. I calculated 19 as sufficient. She stared at me. Then, made the face she made with the not coffee, the face that meant something was wrong in a specific, identifiable way that she had nonetheless decided to accept. The VAR. Yes. You're the strangest logistics officer I have ever encountered. I have been told this. I mean it as a compliment. I have been told that too, I said. Less often. She almost laughed. Not quite. The respiratory unit made a sound it had not been making, and the almost laugh became a controlled breath, and then another, and I watched her manage it the way I had watched her manage everything. The thing that was going wrong was noted, addressed, contained, and then the forward motion resumed. She looked at the dock approach on Koro's monitor. What do I need to do when we land? She said. I'll handle the transfer documentation. You need to walk off this shuttle. That's it? That's the part one can't do for you, I said. Koro brought us in. The dock sealed. The light shifted from transit amber to station white. She stood up. She stood up the way she had walked on, with the deliberate legs that had not read the memo, and she unstrapped and she got the respiratory unit balanced and she stood in the middle of the cargo hold of Shuttle 7 Oral, which smelled fine, and she said, You good? I am a logistics officer, I said. I don't have to be good. I have to be accurate. She did laugh that time. It cost her something. I saw it cost her, saw the respiratory unit work harder for 3 seconds, but she let it cost her anyway. The cargo door opened. Coordinator Vethorin was on the dock with a receiving team and the expression of someone who had approved something she wasn't sure about and was currently assessing whether it had been worth the risk to her career. Her eyes went to Sergeant Reyes. To the monitoring leads. To the portable respiratory unit. To the splint. Non-terminal, she said flatly. Pending review, I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Then, she looked at Sergeant Reyes, who was standing on a dock 6 days from a medical station that had abandoned her, attached to equipment I had manifested around her, breathing at 62%, on her way to a treatment with a 19% success rate, and who was looking back at Vethorin with the same expression I had seen on the first night. Not hope, exactly. Something that preceded hope. The conviction that the door was heavy, not locked. Vethorin made a sound that I could only classify as professional resignation with undertones of reluctant investment, which was not a category the coalition recognition system would have validated, but which I recorded anyway. Get her to intake, she said to the receiving team. They did. I stood on the dock with my log and my notation file and one empty container that had held not coffee, and I wrote in the notation file, the personal one, the one I had carried since my first rotation. She walked off the shuttle. Then, I filed the equipment transfer as complete, logged the manifest, noted the successful delivery of all associated material, and went to find the Palace Station commissary, because I had been awake for 31 hours and I needed something that would be described to me, with the conviction of people committed to a shared lie, as coffee. Phase 1 of the Cascade Interruption Protocol takes 9 days. I know this because I read the literature on the first night at Palace while I was waiting for the commissary to explain the coffee situation to me. They did not explain it, they simply handed me a cup and looked away, and, because there was nothing else to do at 0200 on a station where I had no supply chains to manage, no manifests to file, no equipment to track. My rotation had ended. My reassignment had come in at 1800. A fuel depot near the Threnes Junction, 2 weeks out, logistics oversight for a resupply operation that would take approximately 4 months and involve very little that was unusual or unexplained or attached to monitoring leads. I had filed a request for a 3-week deferral citing pending equipment transfer completion. Coordinator Vethorin had approved it. She had added a note to the approval that said, you are not an equipment transfer anymore, the VAR. Figure out what you actually are and file accordingly. I was thinking about that when Sergeant Reyes went into Phase 1. Phase 1 is, clinically, the part where the treatment tries to interrupt the radiation cascade at the cellular level, which means it is the part where the body is asked to fight a war on two fronts simultaneously, the original damage and the treatment response. The literature described it as a period of significant physiological stress. The literature was describing it the way the commissary described the not coffee. I was not allowed in the treatment wing during active phases. This was a policy I understood and respected and ignored on the third day when a medical assistant named Pell came to find me in the logistics annex where I had been rerouting imaginary supply chains to have something to document, and she said, "She's asking for you." I went. The treatment room was smaller than the tent on the other station had been, and more sterile, and it smelled of something the human medical staff called antiseptic and which smelled to me like a very formal kind of silence. Sergeant Reyes was in a treatment cradle that made the Field 1 look like camping equipment. She had more leads now, more monitors, a breathing apparatus instead of the portable unit, and she looked like Phase 1. I sat down. She looked at me through the breathing apparatus with the flat, reading expression I recognized from the tent ceiling. "You're still here," she said. Her voice was wrong again. Wronger than the first night. It had less structural integrity. "My reassignment was deferred," I said. "Why?" "Pending equipment transfer completion." Her eyes did something. I am not sure what, it was a subtle thing, some small rearrangement behind them, and then she looked at the ceiling of the treatment room, which was not canvas, which was smooth white paneling with a seam running its length that I suspected she had memorized by now. "The VAR." "Yes." "What's Phase 2? I had the literature. I had read it 14 times. Phase 2 is reconstruction. Lower physiological stress. 8 to 12 days. The body is given, the treatment assists the body in beginning to repair the interrupted cascade damage. It's slower. What does it feel like? The literature describes it as, I stopped. The literature described it as a period of reduced acute symptomatology with persistent fatigue and variable neurological effects, which was a document's way of saying you will feel less like you are dying and more like you have been dying for a long time, and that was not what she was asking. "I don't know," I said. "I haven't been told by anyone who went through it." "Because most of them didn't," she said. "Yes." She kept looking at the seam. "I keep thinking about the math," she said. 19%. 31% partial. 50%, whatever you want to call the other side of that. She paused. Breathed. The apparatus worked. When I was in my third deployment, we had a situation where we needed to cross a bridge that our engineers had rated at 40% structural integrity. 40% probability it would hold our weight. I waited. "We crossed it," she said. "What happened?" "It held." She paused again. "But, here's the thing, when we got to the other side, my unit's engineer, a woman named Vasquez, she sat down on the bank and, she said, the math doesn't change based on what happens to you. We crossed it. It held. It was still a 40% bridge. We were just 40% outcomes." I thought about that. "She sounds precise," I said. She was the most precise person I ever knew. Something in her voice changed, not much, barely a frequency shift, but I had been listening to her for 9 days at this point and I heard it. She also died on the bridge we crossed after that one, which had a 91% rating. The seam in the ceiling. Her eyes on it. "The math doesn't change based on what happens to you," I said. "Yes." She looked at me. The eyes behind the breathing apparatus. The monitoring leads. Phase 1, Day 3, of a 9-day process. "So what do you do with that?" she said. "When you know the math and you have to cross anyway?" I had not been trained for this. I am a logistics officer. I manage supply chains. I approve equipment requests. I document material losses. I had processed, in 18 months of joint operations, enough human requisitions to understand that they were a species that consistently asked for things their cataloging systems couldn't classify, and I had learned to approve the request and wait to be surprised. I had not expected the surprise to be this. I think, I said slowly, that if you spend enough time looking at the math, you stop walking. She was quiet. Vasquez was right, I said. The math doesn't change. But, you are not the bridge. You are the person deciding whether to cross it. She looked at me for a long time. You're better at this than logistics, she said. I am very good at logistics, I said. I know. The voice again, that quality, the density of it, something compressed down and, then, offered precisely. That's why it's impressive that you're also good at this. The breathing apparatus cycled. The monitors registered. Phase 1, Day 3. I opened my notation file. I wrote, she is still crossing. On Day 7, she started talking to the nurses. Not asking for things, she did that was necessary, that was patient behavior I had been briefed to expect. She started talking to them. Asking about their rotations. Asking about their families. A Veth Coalition nurse named Oren told me in the corridor outside the treatment wing that she had asked him about his first assignment with the precision of someone who had the energy to care about exactly one thing and had decided it was going to be the people around her. Why? I asked. He looked at me. She said she likes knowing who's in the room with her. She said you can't trust someone you haven't bothered to know. On Day 8 she asked me to bring her the supply manifests from the Palace Auxiliary Hub. Why? I said. I'm bored and your face does something when you're working that is more interesting than the ceiling. I brought the manifests. She went through them with me for 3 hours, which was longer than any supply review I had conducted that did not involve a senior officer, and she found 4 allocation inefficiencies in the Palace medical supply chain that I had not caught and that, once corrected, would reduce the lag time on emergency equipment routing by approximately 11 hours. How do you know this? I said. I ran a supply depot for 8 months in my second deployment. She handed the tablet back. You can optimize for speed or optimize for redundancy, but if you're not building in the human error margin on the pick and pack side, you're going to lose 11 hours every time someone mislabels a thermal unit. I stared at the corrections. You should have been a logistics officer, I said. I'm a soldier, she said. We're all logistics officers. We just call it staying alive. Phase 1 ended on Day 9, 4 hours early, which the treatment team logged as ahead of projected timeline and which one of the doctors, a young human named Chow, one of the 2 who had been assigned to the protocol, described to me as unusual but consistent with a patient who appears to be treating the protocol as a supply problem she needs to solve from the inside. I wrote that down. Chow looked at my notation file. Do you always write things down? Yes, I said. Why? I thought about it. Because I want to know what happened, I said. Later. When I'm trying to understand it. He nodded. He looked like someone who had recently updated his assessment of something. Phase 2 starts tomorrow, he said. I went to tell her. Phase 2 was what she had said it would be: slower, quieter. Less emergency and more endurance. She slept more. Talked less. The nurses brought her things she had asked about during Phase 1, because she had bothered to know them, and they had remembered. Oren brought her a dried food item from his home region that smelled nothing like anything I could categorize and which she ate with the focused attention of someone who had been using nutrition as infrastructure rather than pleasure. Is it good? I asked. It's extraordinary, she said. Try some. I did not try some. I ate my not coffee and my nutrient pack and I worked on the manifest corrections and, on Day 4 of Phase 2 she said, tell me about where you're from. I told her. Threni Sector, a Veth Coalition station that had been built on the mining infrastructure of a world that had been exhausted and abandoned before I was born, the way those places are abandoned, not dramatically, just gradually, until the population was too small to warrant the overhead and the station became administrative instead of industrial and everyone who stayed did so because they had decided, for their own reasons, that leaving was the thing they couldn't do. She listened like she listened to everything, completely, without performance. "Did you want to leave?" she said. "I did leave. I joined the Coalition Auxiliary." "That's not what I asked." I thought about it. The seam in the ceiling. I looked at it for a moment, understanding for the first time why she did. "I wanted to leave and stay," I said. "I wanted the world to be worth staying in." She nodded. Something in her face shifted, not the face she made with the not coffee, not the smile, something under all of it, some bedrock thing. "Yeah," she said. "That's the one." Day 9 of Phase 2, Dr. Chow called me into his office and closed the door, and I sat down, and he sat across from me, and he said, "Her Phase 2 response is atypical." I put my stylus down. "The cascade interrupt is holding at a rate we've only seen in 6 prior patients," he said. "The reconstruction indicators are, she is, statistically, in the upper range of Phase 2 outcomes we've recorded in this program." He was looking at me like this was complicated news. "Tell me the atypical part," I said. "The atypical part is that Phase 2 outcomes in this range have a strong correlation with Phase 3 consolidation outcomes. Which are the outcomes we understand least." He paused. "It's possible, and I want to be precise, because this is a possibility and not a certainty, it's possible that she is moving toward a full cascade interrupt." 19%, I had told her. "The math doesn't change. What do you need from me?" I said. He blinked. Nothing. I wanted to update you. You're listed in her file as Associated Material Supervisor," I said. He stared at me. "It was the classification available," I said. He made a sound very similar to the one Vethorin had made on the dock. Professional resignation with undertones of reluctant investment. "She's going to want to know," he said. "I wanted to tell you first because I've seen how she processes things, and she's going to want to sit with it before she doesn't like to show people what she does with information when she first gets it. I thought you might want to be the one to tell her." I looked at him. "You've been watching her too," I said. "It's hard not to," he said, and he sounded slightly defensive, and also completely sincere. "I told her at 1800. She was sitting up. Not doing push-ups, Phase 2 prohibited active exertion, a rule she had followed more than I had expected, which I suspected meant she understood exactly how much the body was doing and had made the calculation that she could not afford to spend what she didn't currently have." I told her what Chow had said. She listened. Did not interrupt. I told her it was a possibility and not a certainty. I used his words. I was precise. She was quiet for a long time. "The seam." "Then," she said, 19% of what?" "Of the patients who enter the protocol." "How many of those 19% came in with a provisional terminal assessment?" I did not have that number immediately. I pulled the literature. Checked the patient records that were available. Annotated baseline conditions at entry. 4, I said. 4 of the full cascade interrupt outcomes had a terminal assessment at entry. She nodded. "Okay," she said. I know what it is." Not dismissive. Settled. Like something that has been placed in the right spot and no longer needs to be held. The VAR. Yes. What happens if Phase 3 goes wrong? I looked at her. "Tell me," she said. "Then, it goes wrong," I said. "And, I'll still be in the room." The almost smile. The one that was real and had gone slightly wrong in transit. "Yeah," she said. "I know." She closed her eyes. I opened my notation file. The Threnny's assignment was 4 days from departure now. The reassignment couldn't be deferred again. I had filed for it 3 times already and Vethorin had approved it 3 times with notes of increasing exasperation and what I was interpreting as genuine concern for my career, which was kind of her. I had not told Reyes about the reassignment. I was going to tell her. I wrote in the notation file, "The math doesn't change. She keeps crossing anyway." Then, I wrote one more thing, smaller, in the margin, so do I think. I did not fully understand what I meant by it yet. Phase 3 started in the morning.